Hi, folks. Nice to see you all or meet you all. My name is Jessica Bramo, and I'm currently located in Hamilton, Ontario. The city is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. To say this is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. But there is more to say about this land acknowledgement if we are to seriously commit ourselves to truth and reconciliation, and in the context of this presentation, to a reimagining of the response to homelessness. To acknowledge the land with which I am located is to also recognize, unsettle, and respond to the ways that our systems, including the criminal justice system, have and continue to oppress Indigenous peoples, while also shaping how non-Indigenous folks occupy, move through, and experience this place we now call Canada. I am presenting a piece of research with my colleagues Erin Day and Peter Woodrow. Pete is a lived expert who worked with us on this project as one of the peer coordinators and has been an integral role to the execution of this project. When we applied to CAH, Pete was eager to lend his expertise and voice to the presentation. But in the 8 weeks between applying and recording this presentation, Pete's living situation changed in such a way that it made it very difficult for him to participate in the ways that he hoped. Having said that, Pete's insights are embedded throughout the entirety of this work, including this presentation.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, and I completely agree. I want to give a bit of an overview of the project that we are chatting with you about today. So this project really is about addressing the challenges that mid-sized cities face with the increasing visibility of homelessness and the use of police to manage this social problem. So we're specifically interested in investigating the perceptions of homelessness, crime, and safety in a mid-sized community in BC. Our goal is to create a counter narrative on homelessness. And what we mean by that is to decipher fact from rhetoric about homelessness in this city, that this city continues to face deep tensions about homelessness. And so to really dig into what that looks like, with the ultimate aim of creating opportunities for social inclusion for people experiencing homelessness and highlight areas for shared connection and growth among all people in this community. And so this research is guided by two overarching questions. First, how and in what ways do the experiences and narratives surrounding homelessness, crime, and public safety converge and diverge? And second, what opportunities for growth exist in this community to promote community resilience? To ensure the anonymity of our participants, we're not including the name of this city, but what we became clear of as we were doing this research is that this community faced unique challenges based on its status as a mid-sized city, rather than an urban center where we've had lots of research done, or a rural environment, which carries its own specific context. What we're seeing is that this mid-sized city, like this one that we spent time with, they're having a recent expansion and demographic shift in light of urban sprawl, and that this is a relatively new phenomenon of quite visible homelessness. And this research, we should know, was conducted just a few months before the COVID pandemic began. And so many of the community members in this community, and we suggest other mid-sized communities, are lamenting the supposed loss of that small town feel that they thought was connected with their community. And so in turn are adopting a NIMBY stance, assuming that homelessness does not exist or shouldn't exist in their community. To address the questions that we wanted to get at with this creation of a counter narrative on homelessness, we conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews and focus groups with people across 3 stakeholder groups. First, people experiencing homelessness, then law enforcement, and then other community representatives. And that included people like service providers, business owners, and other residents of the community. In total, we spoke with 54 people across these 3 stakeholder groups. And with paying attention to diversity, we also made sure that people who have lived experience of homelessness were equally represented in this project. And so the research coordinators that we had on this project, with Pete included in that, were imperative in helping us reach a diverse group of people. And so that included people who had lived in encampments and those who hadn't, Indigenous peoples, members of the 2S LGBTQ2S+ community, and those living with various health conditions.
So one of the things that we kind of did at the end of this project was to think about different opportunities for change in terms of how communities might respond to homelessness. And in total, we came up with 9 of these. And what we want to do in the time that we have remaining is try to condense these 9 into 3 overarching themes. The first is going to be a brief discussion about breaking the narrative on homelessness, the second on person-centered responses, and then the last on refining service delivery. What you're going to see next in the presentation is a quote that exemplifies each of these overarching themes. We'll spend a few moments talking about that, and then we'll wrap up our discussion. So this quote comes from a lived expert who says, "My survival strategy is to stay unnoticed." So one of the things that we saw in the research was that the narratives around homelessness work to stigmatize people in such a way that they need to stay hidden as a means of survival, thinking about harms that were perpetrated onto their bodies and onto their property. And a lot of community conversations about homelessness tended to dehumanize people who were without a home, and so didn't allow for conversations about solutions that might address the root causes of homelessness in this given community. We should also note that a lot of the narratives around homelessness focused on homelessness as being synonymous with drug use and addictions, with criminality. There was a little bit of discussion around folks who were experiencing homelessness or unhoused people as not being members of the community. And so we suggest, in terms of how to actually break this narrative, is that communities might work with their local media to utilize various social media platforms to build alternative narratives that make it possible for the community to understand homelessness and security in ways that are more reflective of the everyday experiences of its community members, including folks who are experiencing homelessness. In doing this, we could then help perhaps reframe homelessness as a structural issue rather than an individual issue, which really guides some of these narratives that we've talked about. In this quote, a lived expert says, "The majority of police at the encampment had the attitude of, move those effing people out of that place," and basically very heavy-handed, cutting tents, tearing people's stuff out of their tents, and right hand in hand with bylaw officers who would do the same thing. If you weren't there at your tent, they'd come and take your stuff and throw it in the garbage. Like, that's my entire life in that tent, you know? In this city, there was an attempt to invisibilize people who are homeless and treat the issue of homelessness as if there were actual real people who are experiencing it on a day-to-day basis. Person-centered responses to homelessness focus on making sure that addressing homelessness in a community is done through the leadership of lived experts, and that the needs and wishes of people who are homeless are included and not solely based on the fears of the community that are actually driving that response. So a few different examples of how that could be done. One would be to respond to encampments through a human rights lens, again, bringing the kind of bodies and lived experiences of people experiencing homelessness to the forefront of those decisions. The second is to think about building and supporting spaces for people who are homeless and are living in poverty in ways that create better access to resources. So in this particular community, there were no spaces by and for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And so this, again, created a situation whereby homelessness was seen as kind of devoid of an actual person who might actually be living it. The third was to think about maybe developing a continuum of care to provide appropriate health, mental health, and substance use services to reach people where they are at, including harm reduction services. And then finally, thinking about perhaps developing some street outreach programs that support people where they're at, but also create a mechanism that reduces the criminalization of homelessness. And we do see an example of this in other places like in Guelph with the Welcoming Streets initiative.
The last overarching thing we wanted to talk about is refining service delivery. So here we have a quote from a service provider who says, "People assume homelessness, mental health, and substance use are always together in this community. Homelessness is one thing, mental health and substance use issues, and the connector is poverty. That's the connector. A shelter is meant to shelter people. It's not meant to treat people for addiction or mental health. And so if you're thinking that your shelters are failing because people are still having mental health and substance use issues, you're not measuring the right thing." What we're seeing here is that we can't assume that a shelter can do all of the work and provide all of the support people might need in terms of a range of issues, including but not limited to mental health and substance use. And it also recognizes that people who are accessing shelter have various kinds of needs and supports that we need to be delivering in different ways. Mid-sized communities rarely have access to the same level of resources as their urban counterparts in building effective systems of support. Finding ways to build capacity within the community will focus on filling gaps in service and ensuring that there are various supports that can, again, meet people where they're at. And again, we keep using that phrase, meet people where they're at. And what that really comes down to is listening to what the lived experts have to say, and they will guide us in terms of recognizing where we might be missing some pieces. So for example, this can include enhancing competency around housing first. In this community in particular, there seemed to be some misunderstanding. We think with resources available for housing first led people to believe that housing first was only about providing a housing subsidy and not providing wraparound supports. And so being clear about what it means to be keep fidelity to the model and adequately resourcing housing first would be important. And that housing first is backed by research. Second would be collaboration across all orders of government and surrounding municipalities. So a range of government departments and social service sectors need to be invited to the table to co-create a plan for strong collaboration across organizations and groups, and maybe people who don't have pre-existing relationships. And without this kind of coordination, we might be duplicating efforts or again, creating gaps. We also need to work with surrounding areas because one of the things we kept hearing about was, well, they're not from my community. But what happens is people are just being shuffled in various communities that are very close in proximity to each other, who are dealing with many of the same issues, resource capacity, and populations. And so moving people from one community to another is just creating a cyclical effect, which isn't solving homelessness and isn't truly moving it for any one community. And finally, engaging in a systems mapping exercise that can show where that continuum of care lies and what gaps might exist. This has been a very brief overview of our findings. You can learn more. We have a page on the Homeless Hub. You'll see the website here on the screen. So please feel free to visit that website to find our full 9 opportunities for change and our executive summary. Also, quick note that this is part of an ongoing project that we are continuing to look at mid-sized cities and the perceptions and misperceptions of homelessness in mid-sized cities in the Ontario context. And so that website will include our further updates. We're just beginning year 2 of a 3 to 4 year project. So there will be more to come. Thank you.
Thank you.